Welcome to Executive Access, your home for real talk with industry leaders. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, we will hear from Dr. Brett Jacobsen, president of SAIS. Brett has over 25 years of leadership in the education space. At SAIS, he's responsible for over 400 member organizations and independent schools and leading across them. He's also the former CEO and president of the Mount Vernon School, so he was a head of school leading a tremendous amount of innovation. Brett is a futurist, and he really talks to us about the power of paying attention to signals in order to inform your strategic direction as a leader. He discusses how innovation is accessible to any organization in small incremental ways that can be powerful, or sometimes in very big and disruptive ways when necessary. He shares a number of leadership frameworks that I found incredibly important and exciting to explore. And we end with a powerful conversation around retaining top talent. Dr. Jacobsen is a thought-provoking leader. I leave every conversation with him just excited, energized, and ready to dig in on all these things I've learned. I know you will as well. So let's dive in. Well, welcome, Dr. Brett Jacobsen, to Executive Access. I am so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here and look forward to this conversation.
Yes, me as well. Well, we're going to get into more of your background and everything, but I always like to start. I have movers and shakers on my podcast like yourself. So
Oh,
I always like to start with a growth mindset question. What are you doing these days, either professionally or personally, to learn and grow?
yeah. So, I think I'm kind of a scanning for signal sort of person anyway. And so there's a particular model that many may be familiar with. It's called STEEP.
Steep.
And so uh, this model sort of looks at like, what's happening sort of in society and technology and the economy and the environment and politics and looking at all those particular kind of are there signals out there that are pointing us to something? Are we gleaning a new idea from something? So LinkedIn is one of those sort of venues for me to scan for signals. But at the same time, scanning for signal can be a billboard, can be walking past a Gen Zer who's making a particular comment that, like, oh, I need to pay attention to that. What type of a signal? So I think I'm just in a natural scanner for signals at the micro and the macro sort of a level, and LinkedIn is one of those areas that helps me do that.
Oh, so interesting. Now, I'm not familiar with this model, but you've got me curious to go look into it.
Yeah.
But I am fascinated by, like, if I say, looking at things to identify the connectedness of things or trends, or, you hear something over here, you hear something over here, and you're able to connect those and say, wait, what do those have meaning together? And what does that actually mean? Am I on the right path?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and sometimes, there are drivers of change, but then there are signals that you sort of identify. Are they able to grow? So I'll
Mm.
use an education example, which is the SAT. So I can't recall, pre-COVID, post-COVID world, you get sort of mixed up about that. But I think pre-COVID, the California system indicated that they would no longer consider the SAT as a part of their admissions sort of strategy. And so that was a signal, right? And it didn't mean that that was going to grow. Now it did grow,
Hmm.
and then there's been a recent sort of retraction, for that, but it still has that growth has had such an impact. So that's a particular example to say, hey, there's a signal out there. Let's pay attention to it. I don't know if it's going to grow or not. I mean, there's some other signals I could point to right now in our education system, and to see, are they actually going to grow? Because if they do, they'll have quite an impact. So that's kind of an illustration of a signal. But a signal could also be, I've seen an example where you could have a six pack of a soft drink or whatever, and the plastic part of keeping that
Yes.
those cans together. Uh, Many years ago, there was a version where Now, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but that was edible. That
Really?
yes, and so, it that signal probably it didn't grow, right? Because we don't you probably haven't heard about it and people don't talk about it. But the thing is like there's these weird sort of signals out
Interesting.
there, and how could if that did grow, what sort of impact would that have? Um, so it requires a lot of living in ambiguity because some things grow, some things don't, and yet they could have some connective tissue to your industry. A lot of workplace signals out there for sure
Oh, yes.
that
Uh,
we could also talk about.
Excellent. Well, by the way, those things in between the cans, all I know is that every time I have them, I cut them before I throw them away.
Yeah,
I think it's because
yeah,
I heard that, they get stuck around dolphins' noses or something. I
yeah,
don't
for
even know if
sure.
that's true, but once I
Yeah,
heard that, I couldn't unhear it. And so that's my action around those things.
yeah.
But
No, no,
anyway.
and I think that was part of the answer to that. Many things in life is like. And especially from an entrepreneurial standpoint, you know, what bugs me, right? What bugs me or what's a problem to be solved out in the world?
Hmm.
And and that could have been one of those say, hey, this is a problem from a environmental standpoint in terms of dolphins, animals as you describe them. But what if we had a different solution and it could be a solution that we're not adding to the waste? So anyway, it's
Excellent.
just a
Super interesting.
yeah,
And
yeah, for sure.
when I hear you say steep and the signals, and I know we're going to get into this from a leadership
Mm,
perspective, it's how can we notice things early, notice the trends early, decide where we want to put our efforts in so that we
mhm.
can drive the right innovation and keep pace so that we don't one day wake up and find ourselves like, wait, how did we just miss that entire curve that happened
Yeah,
and we're catching up? So
yeah.
you have 25 years plus in the education space. And as I was looking at your background, I love that you have done pretty much every aspect or every facet of, education. You were a CEO and a president of a school system, and now you're the president of SAIS. And I want my listeners to understand that for a second. So SAIS, as I understand it, it's an accreditation organization. So it provides
Mm,
accreditation to independent schools, leadership development, vision, just really trying to help all these schools with some of the things stuff you were talking about, which is the
mhm.
visionary things.
Yeah.
And there's 400 roughly, almost 400 member schools in
Mm,
what you're responsible as president of that organization. Is that right?
mhm. That's right. It covers 15 states,
Okay.
Latin America, and the Caribbean. They're mainly located in the southeastern part of the United States,
Yeah.
but we have some schools sort of scattered out there. And I'd have to say, even more than the accrediting piece, we've applied the kind of jobs to be done framework to our kind of association. Like, why would you hire us? And part of that concept is through accreditation is credential my school. That's not the only way to credential schools. Obviously, ed accreditation is a key component to that. But micro credentialing is one of those things that's burgeoning and growing and has great potential. But in addition to that, it's like build capacity for my team and me.
Mm,
Uh, it could be help me benchmark my school as a comparative analysis of data analysis to similar schools around the country. It could be just help me navigate timely challenges. Uh, and it could be the micro head of school dealing with an issue in the school, or it could be as a global pandemic that's a timely challenge. It also is around, help me expand my network. Kind of this beyond just like, community gathering. That's a critical component of our value. But really around social capital. How can we continue to deepen your network as you continue to grow sort of as an educational leader. So really trying to be real intentional around that. And then I think a final jobs to be done that we talk about is help me future proof my school. So that connects back to all those trends and signals and things that I love diving into research anyway. But it's future proof my school, and in the education sector we're quite at a interesting inflection point around that. So I would sort of expand that conversation a little bit around the types of things that we try to the ways in which we try to support our schools.
I like to talk a lot about a customer obsession, and usually that's in the
Mm,
case of like, I had a sales and tech sales
mm.
background, and my team, if anybody of them are listening, are probably like, yeah, she used to say that all the time. Let's get out there and obsess over our customers. Let's not worry about what we're selling. Let's like focus on the customer, right? And I'm hearing a lot of that in what you're
Yeah,
saying, like, the accreditation point. Yeah, we have to do that. That's like a necessary thing,
yeah.
but that's
Almost
really
the
not.
floor.
That's the
Yeah,
floor. That's not the
yeah.
value. And what you're talking about are value adds and
Mhm.
bringing this idea that like our job is to add value to the head of schools and to their leadership teams and everything that they need to do. And it's probably,
Yeah.
I was saying that the school Portugal that my kids go to, I had an opportunity to be on their board for a while. It was a great experience. And my appreciation grew for the complexity of head of schools and
Mm.
everything that they had to deal with and all of the constituents. So, but I'm
Yeah.
curious about the leadership position perspective. I'm going to get into Mount Vernon in a little bit. So you were
Mm.
president of Mount Vernon School, and now you're in this president role. And I see the SAIS one as a more of a influence leadership role. So you go
Uh-huh.
from, I am, start to finish in charge of this entire one school to now
Mhm.
I am working, cross team with 400 schools and their leadership team. Am I
Yeah.
thinking about that the right way from an influence standpoint? And what's the different hats and how do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. And let me, if I can, just step back a moment, based on your user experience sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's an interesting experience strategy report out right now, and they identify some jobs to be done. And one is around like, um, help me understand that you really, really know me,
Mm,
or um, uh, help me at home. Help me to be more connected. Uh, and so, it's sort of really interesting just from a experience strategy. Um, what does that look like? And that translates differently to different sectors, but it is the part of that question is what is your experience strategy? And yeah, the art of gathering has a dynamic to that for sure. Um, but but I don't know if we necessarily look at, especially in the education sector, look at to have an experience strategy, and so I think that's a real critical dynamic. And so as it relates to my current role or my prior role, I was as the head of school and the CEO of the Mount Vernon School for about 15 years, and we had launched, by the way, in addition to the day school, a preschool through 12 school, we launched a really a consultancy kind of firm, a research and development sort of component of the school. And it began to serve other schools across the country and even internationally. And that was well over a decade old sort of a consultancy that we had developed, which is not always common sort of in the independent school space. And then a couple of years ago, we also launched Mount Vernon Online, which was an asynchronous high school um, that really provided more pathways to open up the pathways for students, more than just the up or down. I'm enrolled in an online school because what we know from COVID is that people really wanted to be in person um, around human connection and human capacity capability. However, while they still want to be at your school, they actually want more flexibility because what I would describe sometimes is our schools are like big box stores.
hmm,
There's one entrance and one exit. Now, once you enter the store, based on the store you're entering, you might give me agency to go down whatever aisle and spend in whatever section time I want to. You might give me a little bit more flexibility to do that, but I'm still exiting the same way I entered. They still want to come to your, you know, I have two teenage girls. So, they want to go into Zara, but they also want to shop online. They want to have multiple types of experiences, and they want the flexibility in order to do that. And so part of that online development for us was, hey, we need to have. They still want to be here, um, but we still need to provide additional pathways, entrances and exits into this physical space that is actually going to one is relevant in this time frame, but also going to support our potential families. And at the end of the day, is a business development, a revenue. We have a checking account, so we have a business. And so, what does that look like? And so, kind of being able to take that sort of experience and then to work with, almost 400 schools who are vastly different. One of the we two values at SAS that's particularly important is that we value independent governance. And then we also value and respect the differences amongst our schools. So we have rural, mid-size, urban, suburban, metropolitan schools all around the country who have from large endowments to a debt service ratio that they're dealing with. And yet, what I know to be the case is that to innovate, to transform, um, doesn't require as many resources as it once did.
Hmm.
And your ability to transform your organization can be done at the most under-resourced sort of environment. So taking that skill set and really building capacity for schools and really stepping alongside them to provide a set of tools that really feel accessible and approachable because sometimes innovation itself, there's fatigue around that term uh, and it sounds too revolutionary or it's not accessible. And so be able to actually be a translator to really demonstrate and illustrate, how it is. So kind of expanded your question a little bit, but I wanted to give you a little bit more context to what we're doing.
I think it's great. I recently created and gave a keynote to about 50 CEOs in the tech space, and it was all about the difference maker for
Mm,
organizations being customer experience and a focus
mm.
on, really what do customers experience when they come to us. But it starts with that fundamental human need. Help me understand that you really know me. So it is
I
connecting the
mean,
dots in a really big way for
yeah.
me. The question that was so interesting. So we
Uh,
were joking right before we got started and taping today that you actually had a podcast back in 2011 or something. I mean, I didn't even find podcasting until a couple of years ago. I was a late to the game person, but you were super early. And again at Mount Vernon, creating the school within a school
mm,
or creating Mount Vernon online, or so you come from on the side of the spectrum, this idea of pushing for innovation and change leadership. In my experience, not everybody is as quick to recognize the opportunity for that, or sometimes
mhm.
people are just steeped in tradition and they don't want to change things. Can you talk a little bit about um, what it takes to lead, in times of change, even just creating the spark for that
Yeah.
change and bringing people along?
I think part of the analysis should be, one thing I'm allergic to is sort of a binary approaches as you might hear from corporate leaders or people who appear to, who are successful and are making a certain amount and they post different things and you're like, oh, I need to wake up at 5 a.m. I need to, follow that particular schedule. I need to do this particular regimen. I think part of the dynamic in the book, The First 90 Days, I think is a great sort of
Love that book.
representation of this. It's really I think that book is challenging you to really understand the organization that you're inheriting, that you're a part of. Is it a startup? Well, with a startup, there's not a lot of inertia. You don't have a lot of resources, but that's a different type of environment. Or is it a turnaround sort of organization? Are you in a growth sort of mode that you're inheriting? Is there a realignment, or is it just in terms of sustaining success because the person you're replacing is this revered sort of, person. And so with each of those five, you have to really understand the offense and defense to play.
Hmm.
So the what I entered in 2009 at Mount Vernon, it was the Great Recession. They only had two graduating classes. It was a phenomenal community, but my children were 1 and 3 at the time. And so I really saw, and this was at the time of, uh, the world is flat and a whole new mind, and all of these resources that were kind of pushing you to look a little forward. And so sometimes when you're in a turnaround position and a little bit of a startup because the upper school is newer, gosh, you have to it's survival.
Hmm.
You have to uncover every rock. You have to get creative. And so, it really forced us to be more forward thinking and innovative because otherwise we might not have survived. So it required us to play a lot more offense in that particular setting. And so, what I would want to communicate is that not every setting is really going to allow for the type of offense. I would say I was a bull in a china shop, in 2009.
But can I ask you?
Now,
Sorry,
yep, go
can I?
ahead.
It's interesting. I always like the new businesses. My brand at Microsoft was they're into a business that no one's figured out yet, and she'll figure it
Yep.
out. And I think you've just hit on for me. I think it's because those things require great innovation. But isn't the inverse true? What if you have a school, it's not a turnaround situation. Things are going great, right?
Yeah.
Is the downside of that then maybe we're less curious, maybe there's less innovation going on because things are
Safe.
just okay,
Yes.
safe. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that is an important point to point out. And I think maybe a tool that I would recommend is around polarity mapping. Is say, hey, we're this successful organization, and the other side, based on a certain methodology, approach, alumni base, generational dynamic, and the other side of that pole is uh, uh, innovation and change and acceleration of technology, whatever you identify there, and really begin to understand, okay, living out our successness, what is the upside of that, and what is the optimization of that future focus sort of position, and both sort of need to be stated, and how do you maximize the upsides of that, but also be willing to state what are the downsides if we just focused on being future focused,
Hmm.
and what if we just focused on being rooted in tradition. So there's some downsides to that as well. So how do you minimize the downsides but maximize the upside? So it really forces, I think, being rooted in tradition and focus on the future as polarities, are that polarity mapping is really important to sort of work out what that means for your school and mission, vision, and values. Because at the end of the day, the business model for independent schools is pretty much the same, and it's really a tuition driven, sort of environment. So if you're in the growth phase or really that success phase, maybe even realignment, like you're you are going to be so measured on you're going to be a little bit more risk averse, and there's a downside to that. If you're in a startup or a turnaround, oh, your risk quotient is really different because you have much more to lose, but you have so much more to gain if you do it
And
right.
people are just kind of like, yes, we need something different, right? And so
Yeah.
it's a little easier. The polarity mapping, I've never really heard it talked about that way, but I'm so glad you brought up mission, vision, values,
Mhm.
because from my perspective, I think about, okay, so how do we honor the past? How do we honor the
Yeah.
tradition? Um, Agitate a bit to get us to a new place, but draw the through line to show people who may find themselves more in the camp of not wanting to change
Yeah.
that actually this change is very much aligned with all the best of where we are today, where we've come from, and to make the case for the future. And so I think the mission and the vision and the
Mm,
values creates that through line where we can anchor and
sure.
say, let's be very clear on who we are.
Yeah.
And that as we evolve, we take the best of what has been and we marry it to
Mm,
where we're going. The people see that through line. They're like, okay, so we're not going crazy and doing some
that's
other
right.
thing, right?
Well, I think that point is really vital in terms of, I wish I would have come to understand the power of common language earlier in
Mm.
my career. But the power of common language uh, is so impactful. Matter of fact, your mission uh, statement itself is full of language. And how do you create some common language around it? Can your community, can your customers, your partners, can they, not asking them to recite that, but can they point to the critical components of it. And the more you develop that common language and you are shaping the narrative around that, and you're illustrating where the message and the message and the experience sort of match, there's less of a gap between message and experience. That's going to be pretty powerful. But a question I would sort of ask in the through line, if that is established, like you've got a real powerful language connection to your mission, is what is your innovation intention? And so that's going to look. That's why I think innovation is accessible because it can look different for everyone. But sort of the scale of that, real quick, is one is: are you just wanting to t- uh, uh, tweak or make some adjustments, sort of innovate around the edges? That is the most accessible. It is the less risky. It costs less. But I believe in small deposits have a cumulative effect. So if
Hmm.
you just live in the tweaks and adjustments sort of innovation stage, gosh, I think it is going to snowball. That flywheel that Jim Collins talks about is going to happen. The second sort of dynamic of that cost a little bit more in terms of money and maybe political sort of capital, and is replacing one system with another, one approach with another, and that's more of a transformational thing. The third stage, and so it just kind of goes in. The third dynamic of that is kind of this disruption phase of innovation. Like you act as if your industry did not exist, and that is the most disruptive. It's going to cost the most, but with each one of those, it has the greatest degree of impact. So I don't think that you have to live in the disruption phase, but I think if you completely ignore it too, I don't know how healthy that is from an organizational health standpoint. But again, if you just want to live out in the tweak and the adjustment area, I think you're going to snowball into transformation. People, your customers are going to demand that you do that. I always have the position. It's kind of an old Chick-fil-A story, but is uh, if you get better, your customers are going to demand that you get bigger. And I think in the innovation stage, you tweak around those edges, that is going to demonstrate how better you're getting, and they're going to demand that they want more. And that's going to create some open doors for transformation in a way that would have been difficult otherwise.
I really like those three levels. I think my bent is like, let's go all the way, let's peg it, let's, hit
Yeah,
the gas pedal all the way to the floor, major
yeah,
disruptive things.
yeah,
And sometimes that works, but the whole marginal gains is what the philosophy that I have
yeah.
like around the beginning part, and how you can just tweak, little things and it adds up is a great way. And I can see how what you're probably bringing, I'm guessing, to the SAIS member schools is just a little bit of agitation. Like, how are you thinking about this? Let's be just really
Mhm.
proactive. That if we
Mhm.
aren't continuing to move in some way, we're probably getting stagnant.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think I've
mhm.
described what I've described myself in taking on this role is that, hey, I'm a climatologist. I'm going to tell you what the weather patterns are and the conditions, and in some degree, it could be a swell coming off the coast. It could be a thunderstorm blowing through, or it could be just nice, bright, and sunny right at the moment. But how do these, some of the workforce trends that are taking place? Maybe there are schools that are not affected by that weather pattern because they have all field positions and they have high performing sort of people generally. Now, this is a weather pattern that is going to extend to everybody at some point, but nonetheless, um, that's sort of how I've been describing it. Hey, I'm just gonna. It's your mission, vision, values. Here's the weather pattern. And when you described like you tend to lean into the disruption piece, which, that's I can relate to that. Scott Belsky, I think in his book, maybe Making Ideas Happen, one of his books, he references that, organizations need dreamers, doers, and incrementalists. And you need kind of a nice, healthy distribution of all three of those in order uh, to create some healthy and what is the right pace and approach for your organization.
I think pace is such a great word. I'd love to
Yeah.
share just a very short story
Yeah.
related to what you're talking about, then ask you my next topic. But when I was on the board and was part of the team that was re-envisioning the new mission statement, right? We came up with what I think was a beautiful mission statement. It was meaningful, but what I learned through that process is it was actually the process that was the most meaningful,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
Through the many, many, many stakeholder voices that we heard as we developed it, what we learned was, where are people aligned? Where do we realize that we thought we were aligned, but we're actually not? And
Yeah.
out of that, coming an opportunity for the board and the senior leadership team to make some decisions about where we're going and who we are.
Mhm.
That the whole process was the most value. That the mission statement that we came out of was great and will be a guidepost for decision making
Mhm.
in the future. But I would argue that organizations that
Mhm.
haven't really taken a look at that in a while, it's been
Yeah.
hanging on their wall, and
Yeah.
it's a really valuable thing to go through, and to
Mhm.
start going down and start to prompt some of these questions you're talking about that we have to really be thinking about, because if we're not thinking about those questions, we're probably not even taking a step
Mhm.
towards the innovation.
I think the greatest compliment that any leader could have, I would say in the education sector or corporately, is that when you get a when you get a complaint or a concern in the language of your mission statement or your norms or mantras that you have are used against you as a part of that. That's a critical piece when you're getting the inhale and exhale of your community pushing back on you, but they're using the language that is being promoted or the narrative is shaped around. Then gosh, you at least have some alignment around the words, like you coalesce them around that, and that's real opportunity to partner with anybody pushing back or having a concern. That's a gosh, you have just moved mountains to get there. Like it's going to create so many other opportunities going forward. So
Like we can
I
we
love
can
when that happens.
debate, how we make that mission
That's
come
right.
true, but we're at
That's
least aligned, and then we can get
yeah,
to that point. That's great.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm dying to ask you. So I was like reading through your bio, and it said that you are a certified foresight practitioner, and I'm like, what the heck
Mhm.
is that? And I'm reading what certified foresight is. And I'm like, he's a
Yeah,
futurist. That makes total
yeah,
sense now.
yeah.
Can you just spend a couple of minutes, because I want to ask you about a couple of the
Mhm.
shifts in education that you're seeing. But can you just
Yeah,
describe what value you see out of that, not specifically that certification, but that mindset to you as
yeah.
a leader, but also an organization.
Mhm. Well, first of all, I'm addicted to tools. So, because leadership is much about the gray, the ambiguity, managing the tensions versus trying to solve the problems, and I never know what sort of tool I need, sort of at the moment. And I think tools have really changed my leadership disposition and implementation execution. So the foresight piece I knew I'd been following Institute for the Future for a long time. They work with major companies, around the world. They have provided some interesting sort of research reports. Whether I fully have always agreed with them or not, that wasn't the point. It was like, gosh, they're helping me scan for signals in a way that I wouldn't have access to. So they're providing research for me in some ways for free. And so I'd been following them and knowing that they were putting out this foresight practitioner certification, that it'd be a great opportunity, especially during another strategic planning cycle that we were going through at the school, that I could deepen my capability and capacity, and then I could serve our community in a better way. And so it's just another set of tools around being a futurist, and that's where all the scanning for signals sort of really comes from, and the ability to look back to look forward, and then also learn from the future as it emerges. It's those two particular components that I think are really important. We tend to look back to look forward a lot, but it's hard to really sort of learn from the future as it emerges, and therefore, how does synthesizing that? How does that? look like, for us, and then it's tangible, for a community, and that's rooted in your mission and vision. So it's through the Institute for the Future that I've received that certification, and it continues to really pay off as I work with schools.
I think it's great. I work with a lot of CEOs, more in the for profit sector, some
Mhm.
nonprofit,
Mhm.
and I also senior leaders, and I know that sometimes making space to think strategically and to
Oh,
take a step back, it's the hardest thing to do. And so I like
mm,
frameworks. I like sending out the message that as a leader, you're going to be a better leader for your organization if you're carving out the time
yeah.
to do this. And I like this idea of signals too, because it's not like I have to carve out time on my calendar for 2 hours. I mean, certainly you should be doing that, but also
Yeah.
just the mindset that you bring in terms of how you look at the world every day will give you that perspective.
I tell you what, you've really hit on a universal problem across sectors. Leaders, like when we survey heads, or I survey advancement professionals, or most recently academic and division leaders. When you ask them what is one of their top challenges they're navigating their community, one always in the top five, if not one, two, or three, is balancing daily demands with strategy.
Hmm.
And so I think part of what we're taking a look at is how to really expand the capacity and capabilities of our middle managers so that executive leaders in particular and their teams can actually have more margin for strategy. Because without that, how does one's community progress? And yet, even in a small deposit sort of way. So, I think you've really hit on kind of an epidemic of sorts that is confronting um, leaders across industry. And how can we, as like the two of us, how can we help organizations, companies, create more margin so that they can actually think about the vision and strategy that they're trying to move towards.
Are there any practices, even practical practices that you've seen work for that leaders can
Mhm.
bring to the table just to even get that sort of that part of your brain working?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple. I think there are multiple pathways. One pathway is just around productivity. Like, what are your productivity tools? I mean, it's that what is your ideal work week? What
Hmm.
does that look like? And are you, I'm a big fan of time boxing, sort of as an example. So,
Yep.
are you time boxing? I don't know, scanning for signals as an example. So, productivity in those tools, I think, is one way. The other, McKinsey has a recent research report around kind of developing a leadership factory, and part of that, leadership factory is around providing deeper exposure for your middle managers in particular to be a part of experiences that they wouldn't have otherwise. And that's one facet. So they have about five or six different things that they're really sort of emphasizing about how to build greater capacity, for them. So I think that um, sometimes as leaders we tend to think, "Gosh, we'll just do it. It takes too long otherwise." Or if my hand is not in it, then it's not going to be successful. And so it's sort of greater later. The investment on the front end, yes, it's going to require more time to invest in your middle managers. But the more you invest in them, it is going to be greater later for you as a leader. So those are two examples of productivity on your own end. And then at the same time, really invest in your leadership team and your middle managers so that and therefore cultivate the trust in their decision making
Hmm.
so that you don't so limit the amount of decisions you're making so that you can actually it kind of goes back to essentialism, that book around what is your highest point of contribution, and being very clear as a leader, like what is your, and then making sure everybody understands what their highest point of contribution is, and therefore, and then that's teamwork, right? And I know that's making it sound simpler than it is, but But I think those are some ways in which I would think about creating margin for strategy.
I think that that's really great.
Mm,
I stumbled upon one. It was when I had moved on to a higher level of leadership and I was realizing that I was missing the context of the day to day because I just
mm,
wasn't experiencing the things
yeah,
that I got to experience as an individual contributor or a first line leader.
mhm,
And so by accident, just because I was missing and craving that context, I would just ask a million questions. What do you see? What do you see that I can't see?
yeah,
What are some of the themes that you're seeing in your business? And at first, my team would be like, "What do you mean themes? Like we're here to talk about like our
mhm,
pipeline or something tactical, and
yeah, yeah,
but just asking those questions get that look from the person like, wait, what are you talking about? But over time, they start to come
mm,
to realize that in order to answer the question that I know inevitably you're going to ask, I'm going to have to step back and think
mhm,
in a different way. And so I would also just point out as a leader, just the questions you ask set the tone
mm.
for the organization and what you're asking people to. That's a very, very small
Yeah, no, no,
example, but
actually, oh, I love that. I just can't come across College of Edinburgh. They have this reflection toolkit. I'll send it. I'll
oh,
link you to it. And so it's just a various types of reflection tools that really could be helpful, especially one that I utilize a lot is a tool called 515, and it asks the people who report directly to me to take to answer 5 questions, no more than 15 minutes. And it's really, and if it's done on a weekly basis, although you could do it on a monthly or quarterly or whatever, is really about like, hey, what did you accomplish before? What are you trying to? What are your priorities? Sort of moving forward. What are some leadership lessons you've been learning in the midst of navigating leadership life? And then kind of a well-being check, like how are you? And honestly, asking that question has revealed so much. It has allowed me to be more empathetic as a leader,
mm,
but understanding the more the and one of the questions is like, what are the challenges or roadblocks you're confronting right now? Like those, and I say don't spend more than 15 minutes answering those 5 questions. That simple tool is so profound, like you're saying, the reflection, it can unearth all sorts of things.
that's excellent. And I love that if
Mm,
done regularly, it just creates a constant alignment
yeah,
so that there's no surprises down the line. What did you mean? I thought we were here and we're here, or the
yeah,
dreaded like, review at
mhm,
the end of the year where all the surprises come up about performance. I'm
yeah.
definitely going to link to that. Well, I'm going to link to all these things. Every time
No,
I
that's
talk
good.
to you, Brett, it's like I have like, I don't know, hours and hours of reading to get to check out all these frameworks. It's great. I love it because I love learning. So let's talk about maybe one or two shifts in education because I was so fascinated. By the way,
Yeah.
any of my listeners who are interested in shifts in education, I would encourage you to go on LinkedIn and you put up videos that are just like really short, thoughtful videos. Also, some writing around, sort of future ideas. I think it would be great for my listeners if they're interested to hear you on those. But there was one that you talked about. Let's see, which one do I want to ask you about? All right, so workplace shift, and we brought that
Yeah.
up a little earlier.
Yeah.
To me, this is all about. All right, so everybody's concerned about retaining, recruiting great talent,
Mm,
and you talked about moving from where there used to be employee contracts with people to
mm,
now that is more of a
mm.
lifestyle
Yeah.
contract and the importance of purpose. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Ooh, and I think part of setting that up, in particular too, is that if you look from the 1970s, when I was born in the early 70s to the 2020s, the number of people in college connecting to any form of the college of education studies to any degree has dramatically drop from the 20% down to maybe 4% and maybe even lower sort of at this point. So just the people sort of connecting to that industry in terms of study has dramatically dropped. So there's a brand shift in the midst of this workplace shift. There's a brand shift that's taking place. Also, when you look at a Pew Research report, maybe last year, is the American education system on the right track or the wrong track? 16% of Americans said that the American education system is on the right track.
Only
I
16?
mean, that's only 16.
Wow.
Um, if you look at the net promoter scores amongst educators who are actually in the industry, next to healthcare, we are at the bottom of net promoter scores are now on our own industry. Now, you could sort of understand that because of COVID, those being on the front lines, that's understandable. But nonetheless, so that is the foundation to get into this workplace shift dynamic. I mean that is not. Also, the University of Chicago put out a survey, and I typically ask this question rhetorically in front of a group of educational leaders. But the question on that survey was, how likely would you recommend for your child to become a teacher?
Hmm.
Ouch. Like, I mean, probably even the educators in the room probably less likely to do that. In the when you look at that study just across the board, and that wasn't asked to educators, that those numbers are not great. So when you just look at those are different signals out there that are like, what does this mean? And then you translate into workplace shift. When I got my first teaching position in 1995, they paid me 21,000. I thought I was rich. I didn't realize I had signed a loyalty contract, meaning, gosh, I had a good job, had a great boss. This is a stable environment just coming out of college, and I'm loyal to this organization. And if you want me to wear 50 hats, oh, I'll wear 75 hats. And oh, you're not going to pay me any more for it? No problem. I'm building my resume. Like I'm a loyalty contract sort of around that. But the newest part of our workforce, they're signing a lifestyle contract. Uh, and to some degree, it probably is healthier, right? And so by signing a lifestyle contract, I want to point out that it doesn't mean that they're less loyal to your organization. They're just it's loyalty plus. Like they have multiple loyalties that they have, and it's a much more holistic sort of a approach to the way in which they're signing this particular contract. The problem is, as a Gen Xer, if I'm a leader, am I leading from a loyalty contract position because that's the contract I signed almost
Hmm.
30 years ago? And I can no longer lead from a loyalty contract position. I need to lead from a lifestyle position. Now, by the way, I don't believe those are binary either. I think polarity map that is really important. Polarity map lifestyle and loyalty as contracts and maximize the upsides and minimize the downsides. And so I just think when in Deloitte and in particular is a really great sort of study for Gen Z and millennials in terms of when you talk about lifestyle, like what does that mean? And sometimes it's less about fully the compensation sort of around that, but the lifestyle holistically that they want to lead. So one thing that we are teaming up with Vanderbilt right now to do uh, Dr. Grimes from Vanderbilt to do a research study around the retention of early career teachers. And one thing I would sort of recommend across the industry, and one thing we're doing in the study is around around the job embeddedness theory.
Hmm.
And the job embeddedness theory really talks about the more you are embedded in your workplace, the less likely you are to quit. And it's quickly, there are three particular areas around that. One is around social links. What are your social links in the community in which you're in? Now, Gallup has pointed out, hey, if you have your best friend, that's critical. I would say it's best friend plus. Like, what are your social links? I would say there's some social, you know, you know, just that community and culture that's a part of that. The second part of it, and maybe there's some social capital to that. The other is around suitability. Suitability is, hey, am I suitable to fulfill the expectations that this organization is asking me to fulfill the job to be done? Also, the suitability, the other side of that coin is the culture that I've entered in, is that suitable for me? And so suitability plays both ways. And then lastly is there are two sides of this coin too, is around sacrifice. What sacrifices am I willing to make inside this organization? Like how many hats are you going to ask me to wear? And if so, you're going to pay me for them. And then on the flip side of that is if I left this organization to go somewhere else, what am I willing to sacrifice about about the organization I'm in to leave? And so I think that when we look at the 4 or 5 different generations we're dealing with in the workplace, rather than painting with broad brushes, is really understand the social links, the suitability, and the sacrifice for each employee. That requires a lot. But the more you can understand about those 3 things per employee, I think you're going to be in a better position to recruit and retain the highest performing people in your area, in your industry, and really have people from other industries coming to you, as well. So those are some things that we're taking a look at versus also just characterizing Gen Z a certain way or Gen Xers a certain way.
It's
Like,
easy to
what
do
is
that, right?
yeah, we tend, and I can be I can do that too. But I think that job admittedness, there's really something to that, and it requires a little bit more critical thinking and really knowing your employees in a different way. But that's why I always ask, like, is your employee value proposition still relevant? And sometimes we think about the value proposition of our organization, but we don't really ask the question about the value proposition of our employees. And I just think this is a much more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. And so, what does that mean for organizational leaders today? I think that's important.
Well, and I definitely know that there's nuance of the contract, the workplace contract in education, but everything you're
Mhm.
saying, I'm like, oh, this is every,
Yeah.
for-profit organization is going through the same thing. There may
Mm.
be some interesting other things like the teachers have to not only worry about their customer, the students, but the parents and how the parents act towards
Yeah.
them and everything and all the other
Yeah.
constituents. But what I like about what you just said is it's both a broad way of thinking and a framework about the overall employee value proposition, but also what you said about, and by the way, I think one of my guests said that it's a one-on-one sport. You have to get in there and really understand
Yeah.
what that looks like for a particular person.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And to recognize that, I'm Gen X as well, we come about it from a different point of view and not to translate our thoughts onto others. And it doesn't mean people are less likely to work hard or lazy or any of those negative
Yeah.
stereotypes. So I think that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, I
Wow.
love that.
Well, Brett, I just thank you so much. I have a page full of notes. So great. I'm
Uh,
going to have to spend all weekend looking up all of
okay.
these things and growing. But that's the gift that you give me and all our listeners. So thank you so much. If you could, I just asked one final question as we wrap up to all my guests. So if you could give just one piece of advice about leadership, what would that be?
Mm. I would say start from where you are, not where others are perceived to be.
Ooh. I'm tempted just to leave it just like that, but can you just give me 2 more minutes? Because I'm dying to know what you mean by
Yeah,
that.
I think I think s- someone as a leader has talked about falling into a comparison trap, and I think we tend to look around to see who perceived to be successful,
Hmm.
and we can be inspired and challenged by that. There's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, the organization you've inherited, even if it's a startup, like regardless of where that organization is in the journey, we can talk about the changes, we can look at what benchmark and what other people are doing, but at the end of the day, we need to understand who we are. Like we need to, Jim Collins talks about confronting the brutal facts of your current reality. Like confront those brutal facts, and then say, okay, we're going to start from where we are. It's not where we want to be, and we're not going to. It's not where others are perceived to be, because we're going to measure ourselves against our mission, not against the school or the company down the street, because we have a particular mission, and we can understand what the marketplace is, and the jobs to be done that people are hiring those companies or schools to do. But we're building surfboards for people who live near the ocean. We're not building surfboards for people who live in other parts of the world. And we're wanting people to buy not only a surfboard a year, but maybe two or three surfboards a year and invest in that. And so sometimes in your market space, people are going to say no to your product and say no to what you're doing. So be real clear on your identity and understanding where you are, and then start just making small deposits. And when you get better, your customers are going to demand that you get bigger.
We're going to do a reprise where we're going to talk about nothing but leadership authenticity, because I feel
Okay.
like there's so much more we could talk about there. But
Yeah.
Brett, thank you so much for your time today. What a gift you've given me and others in terms of how you think big and actually also bring that down to like the individual
Mm.
level. So just thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. I love the conversation. I love the work and the research you're doing as well, and sharing this to others. I think is particularly important. So grateful to be here.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Join us every Tuesday for insider access to executive leadership.